Welcome to episode 82 of Real Health Radio. You can find the links talked about as part of this episode at the show notes, which is www.7, all spelled out, so SEVEN, health.com/82.
Welcome to Real Health Radio. Health advice that's more than just about how you look. And here's your host, Chris Sandel.
Hey all, it's Chris Sandel here, and welcome to another show, another episode of Real Health Radio. So today it's an interview show, and I'm speaking with Mel Noakes. So Mel is the self-care coach. She specialises in working with women to balance their professional success with their personal health and happiness. She helps her clients slow down, embrace their uniqueness, and respect their bodies so that they can thrive. She teaches women to find success and happiness on their own terms and believes an extraordinary life starts with self-care. She shared the stage with Denise Lewis, OBE, Victoria Pendleton, and Rebecca Adlington, and is a Huffington Post writer. So Mel is someone who I've known online probably for the last 6 months or a year, something like that. She's on my mailing list and sent me an email in respect to a podcast that I did last year, and we just started chatting, and I looked at her website and some of the content she was putting out. And then we started chatting again on email this year in respect to an article that I wrote about self-care. So Mel's tagline is the self-care coach. So she really enjoyed the article that I wrote and said if I ever wanted to do a podcast episode on self-care, she'd be up for joining me. So that's what we did. So as part of the show, we talk about self-care, and this is a term that I think's become quite popular or trendy in the health field. So we dive into what it means for each of us, because it's not just massages and bubble baths, which is how most people think about it. We talk about Mel's history with an eating disorder. So she suffered with anorexia and bulimia for 15 years. She was sectioned. She had different times as an inpatient, and all without much success. So we chat about what helped her to finally turn all this stuff around. And we also cover Mel's love of traveling. And I consider myself a fairly well-traveled guy, but Mel really leaves me in the shade with this stuff. So we talk about how travel has helped her with her own personal growth and with development, and just some of her favorite places. And Mel was really lovely to chat with, and it's very easy flowing conversation. So let's get into it. This is my conversation with Mel Noakes. Hey Mel, welcome to Real Health Radio. Thanks for joining me today.
Thank you for having me.
So you describe yourself as the self-care coach, and self-care is something that I definitely want to chat with you about. But I guess to start with, how did you get into coaching?
That's a great question. Quite by accident, to be honest. I had, through my background, I had suffered with eating disorders for many, many years and had gone through all sorts of different therapy, which for various reasons just didn't really work for me. And through my recovery, through different forms of my recovery, I found myself in Peru on a year-long sabbatical, and sort of had this epiphany moment of realizing how amazing my body was, and just thinking it was this incredible thing that I hadn't noticed before. And I always say it sounds really easy when I can say this on podcasts and interviews, but having been ill for 15 years and loads of therapy, that was quite a monumental point of coming to terms with, forgiving myself for my eating disorders, for sort of appreciating how amazing it is to have a body. And I knew I wanted to help other women get to that point where they could embrace who they are and love their bodies and actually see the potential in their bodies and see it as a vehicle for living. And so I came back and looked for ways to do that, but I had no real understanding of what I really wanted to do. I just knew I wanted to help, but I knew I didn't want to do it through the traditional counselling or therapy or psychotherapy ways. Okay. And I was also like, I want to do this quickly. So I looked for something quick and something that felt connected, and I stumbled across coaching, and that's how I sort of started.
And so what coach training did you do? And I know you said you wanted to pick something that was sort of short and sweet, and so you could get started. But yeah, just describe a little bit about the coaching training that you've had.
Yeah, so I started off with a very traditional life coaching qualification, although it wasn't traditional in the traditional sense, in that the school I trained with, which is the Animus Institute, was wonderful because they gave you such a balance of different things. So I learnt CBT and a little bit of NLP and sort of very typical coaching models and existential coaching, which Nick, the founder, loved and baffled me, but I loved it and found it really interesting. And then I went on to study NLP and hypnotherapy and health coaching because I suddenly found things that I was really fascinated by and interested by. So I then delved deeper as the need and as the want and as the interest led me, and as the clients needed as well. There were certain things that I knew I wanted to work with that I'd get as far as I could in my toolbox and then want more. So yeah, it sort of developed quite naturally, actually.
Okay. And I know when I reflect on some of the training that I've done, there's paths where I would definitely do that again. There's other bits where in hindsight, maybe I'd do it differently. With all the training you've had, would these be places you would recommend people to go? Or if you had your time over, how would you do it differently?
I don't think I would do it differently at all, actually. I think the one thing I would do differently is, and I don't know if this is typical of a lot of people, but certainly a lot of the people I work with, it's typical. It's like you need the certificate, the proof that you can do it. So I always felt like I needed to know more to help and to be better. And to some degrees you do, but actually often just being there and showing up and wanting to help people is enough. So I think all of it was really relevant. I think I'd have taken a lot of the pressure off myself out of it. And I think it's a great place if you're interested in personal development, going on these courses, even if you don't decide that you want to be a coach or use it to work with people specifically in a business, your own personal development and personal journey and growth that you go through learning these tools and actually practicing things, and the stuff you bring up for yourself and have to unpack yourself to actually be able to help other people. I mean, that journey is priceless, really is.
Yeah, and I think one of the things you said there in terms of getting a certificate, which I think is useful in certain situations, but the best training that you can have, especially when it comes to coaching people, is coaching people. And there is no training that you can do that is a substitute for just doing it for years and years and years. And I really do think that it just takes time in a lot of senses to build up that confidence and build up that skill set.
Absolutely. And there's those things that you just sort of sense when you've been working with someone, because you've just got this backstory of so many people that you've coached. You can hear things or sense things. You can get to things quicker. And like you say, I could have 20 certificates on my wall that tell you that I'm good, but until you actually work with people and get into the bones of it. Yeah. And that's the stuff that I love.
Yeah. And so one of the things you said at the top there was that you struggle with an eating disorder, and I know a little about your backstory in terms of that going on for 15 years. Are you able to describe a little bit about that in terms of how it got started and the progression?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think what's really interesting about eating disorders, I mean, people talk about trigger events. You'll hear that kind of terminology a lot. And the interesting thing is, like everything, there's not just one thing that causes it, but there's a myriad of different things and different sets of circumstances that lead you to that path. For me, I think a lot of it started actually when I was really young. So I was 18 months when my dad died. And although I wasn't really old enough to understand what was going on, I think that loss and that losing somebody that was such a big figure sort of stayed with me and continued to stay with me for a long time, even though my mum remarried and my dad is the most phenomenal guy in the world. And it just goes to show you don't have to biologically father somebody to be a father, an amazing father at that. So I think from a very young age, I was aware of sort of loss and wanting to fit in and wanting to be good and blaming myself a little bit for him going. And then as the years went on, I think, I got bullied at school like most people do. There were rites of passage, just everyday things. But I think my personality and various things, I felt a little bit, I think my self-esteem was really lacking, and I had real sort of abandonment issues and loads of other things going on. And then one day I was in my mum's kitchen and her friend Rochelle was there. That's awful that I've named her. Gosh, that's awful. My mum's friend was there. And I remember her turning around to me and just saying really casually, like she didn't mean anything by it. She was like, oh gosh, you've got such a great stomach, Mel, great stomach, but you could really do with my legs and bum. And I just remember in that instant just being like, oh, I'm not okay, and that's not okay. And I remember going back upstairs to my room, and for the very first time I'd ever done it was just like looking in the mirror and dissecting my body and just being like, oh, I'm not okay. Like, I'm not perfect and I need to do something about that. And
how old were you, just so I can place that?
Yeah, I was about 12,
okay.
12, 13. And then it was just a very slow, steady, I started to cut out sweets and chocolates and things that you're meant to cut out because everyone was talking about dieting and, everyone was applauding you for doing those things. And then it just gradually got more and more serious, and it was cutting out hot food, and then it was just cutting out so many different things. And before I knew it, I was full blown into anorexia and bulimia, because why have one if you can have two, right? 2 for 1. So yeah, and then the challenge with an eating disorder is it sort of takes hold before you realise, you don't wake up one day and decide to be anorexic or bulimic. You wake up and just feel a bit wrong and feel like you need to control something, and before you know it, the thing that you wanted to control controls you, and then it's a whole heap of fun to try and untangle that weave.
Yeah. And so you mentioned as well that you went to see various therapists and none of that stuff worked. So what were some of the things that you tried that didn't work for you?
Gosh, lots of different things. So I was an inpatient. I was hospitalised at 16 through my GCSEs. Don't recommend that. It was a really challenging time, and for somebody that was so young, I was 16 and I was in hospital with some far more advanced, far longer suffering patients who I learned a lot of things from, and probably extended my eating disorder as a result of it. And certainly the nurses and the people that were there just had a very different approach to the approach I needed. I think a lot has changed in the years since then. So I tried that. I tried very traditional sort of counselling. I tried family therapy, which was possibly the most horrific thing I ever went through, because the therapist turned around to my young brother at the time. He must have been about 9 or 10, and said to him, "Oh, do you want your sister to die?" And I was just like, oh my God. So things like that, it just felt really aggressive and quite full on. And, I'm a really proud spokesperson for Beat Now, and I work a lot with the charity for, helping people understand eating disorders better. And I think there's a lot more understanding now. But certainly back there, and also I was ill, so I didn't want the treatment. I didn't want help. So I came at it from a very different place.
Yeah.
And I think if you're not willing to engage in it, of course you see the bad in it. But certainly even reflecting now, being somebody that works in this space, I'm just like, gosh, that just wasn't right in a lot of ways. Not for me. It does work for a lot of people. I don't want to sort of diss therapy, because it certainly works and has its place. It just wasn't right for me.
Sure. And one of the things you mentioned earlier there was in terms of your father passing away when you were only 18 months old, and it reminded me of some of the work of, do you know Dr. Gabor-Mate or Gabor-Mate? I never know how to pronounce his name.
Oh, no, I don't actually.
He's done a lot of work around addiction and looks a lot at trauma. And I think a lot of what he talks about is that trauma is the underlying thing that caused a lot of these problems. And I think he is from a Jewish background. I can't remember where he was in Eastern Europe, but he grew up around the time of the Second World War. He was an infant, and he kind of looks at a lot of the issues that he's now dealt with over the years, and said that there's a lot of links between everything that was then going on in the during the war and during that time when he was only 1 and 2 years old. And so, just some of the comments that you made there really reminded me of some of the work that he's done and he's talked about. So probably someone to look into. He's got a number of really great books. He's done at least one TED talk. So I'll put some of this stuff in the show notes for other people. But that was one of the things that came to mind.
That's really useful. Thank you. And you're right. When you're so young, you don't have the words to verbalize. You don't have the way to explain how you feel. You just internalize it. And I think that's, you see that in a lot of people, and I'm sure you do in your treatment. People are responding to stuff as if they were still stuck in these sort of old patterns, and they've forgotten that they made those decisions as a really young child when they didn't have better resources. And I certainly think for me, my father's death, although it never noticeably affected me in my everyday life, was definitely the root cause of a lot of my problems, without doubt.
And the other thing you said was just like really crippling self-esteem or low self-esteem. Was this how you would have identified yourself as, say, a 5-year-old and a 7-year-old, or did that come later as you got into your teenage years?
I think it came gradually. I think there was always this this awareness of, please don't leave me. I think, I joke now as an adult, I have abandonment issues, but I remember thinking that as a child, going to school my first day was terrifying for me because I was scared my mum wouldn't be there when I got back. It was like all these little things that just, it's only now reflecting and obviously doing a lot of work on this stuff to really get myself through it that I can reflect back and think, yeah, those things were probably connected. But certainly the older I got, the more pronounced it got, the worse I felt about myself. And it probably wasn't helped, going through teenage years, becoming aware of social media and boys and the way your body looks and, hormonal changes, all of these things combined is hard for any teenager, but certainly for me who had been possessed. I want to say possessed, that's entirely the wrong word. But had been predisposed to have sort of these feelings, it just added more and more pressure on and more sort of opportunity to go down the wrong path, really. And
so then how did you get out of that place? So obviously you talked about the fact that lots of treatment didn't work. What was if there was a thing, like one thing that changed it all, or what were a couple of things that really helped to shift all of that?
I think it was as I got older, and I can tell you the day where I decided actually that I was like, I need to stop this. And I was at dinner with friends, which was really sort of typical. I'd go for dinner, I'd find a million different reasons not to eat. And, it was always traumatic, but I never wanted to be left out. I wanted to be there. And I remember, sounds funny and it's not funny at all, but I have like an encyclopedic knowledge of London bathrooms because I spent so much time in them for so many years. And I was in a particular bathroom of a restaurant and I just stood there and I was like, why am I here? I think I was 26 at the time. I'm a 26-year-old woman. I've got all my friends who I love out there in the restaurant and I am still in here. What am I doing? And I just had this like wake up moment of, oh my God, I need to sort this out. I need to do something. And that's when I went to the doctor and I found an amazing therapy group where I was connected with lots of people with different types of eating disorders. So I wasn't connected to people that had anorexia or bulimia, but people that had binge eating disorders and lots of other things as well. And it was just, it like opened my eyes to the fact that I wasn't unique, even though I like to think I was.
Yeah.
And that lots of us were using food to mask bigger problems. And it sounds so obvious, obviously, when you talk about it back, but I hadn't really realised that's what we were doing. It was like, actually, all of us have got the same problem, is that we don't want to access our problems. We're using food to mask it. And it was a real wake-up call. And it was from there that I then went travelling and really did the work and took time to understand myself. So it was a real slow stepping stone. And, I've been in my recovery now for nearly 7-8 years, which is half the time I was sick. And I just think, gosh, it was such a long period of my life. And it was I would just never wish it on anyone.
Sure, definitely. And just with something you said there, had it never been in the previous treatments pointed out that this was not about food, that this was you trying to cope with other stuff, or it had been, but you just weren't really ready to hear that message?
Yeah, I wasn't ready to hear the message at all. It was just, I think I was just an angry, very ill person that didn't want help. And I was like, don't take this away from me. This is mine. How dare you? I'm good at this. I can do this. Don't you dare try and challenge me. And so often in the therapy sessions I would just shut down and not say anything. So I was like, well, you can't. I was like just the typical angsty teenager. You can imagine scenes from, any movie where teenagers just don't want to talk to their parents and strop and slam the door. I basically did that for 15 years.
Okay. And it's interesting when I then reflect upon the clients that I work with, because everyone who's coming to me is already at least at some level of, I want help and I want to deal with this. I haven't been put in a situation where I'm having to deal with someone who's like, nope, I don't want to deal with this. This is my life. This is how I'm doing things. So I don't know what that experience is like. And I don't then have any suggestions to how to get through to those type of people, because that's just not what I've worked on. So, but yeah, when someone is ready and wants to work on it, then yes, I've got the tools that I can help you to do that with. And probably the same with yourself.
Absolutely. And I think that's such a big thing for any kind of mental health disorder, and eating disorders are mental health. People think it's like the amount of people that said to me, just snap out of it, just eat. And you're like, don't you think I would want to do that?
Yeah.
If I could. A lot of it is just being patient, being loving, being supportive, trying wherever possible to not be judgmental. And the reality is for anyone suffering with mental health, to some degree, they have to want to change for it to happen. You can't force them through it. Certainly I ended up in hospital because I was sectioned, and that's why I was so angry, because I was just like, absolutely not, I do not want to be here. It made it so much harder. But also for some people, like, their lives are in danger. You have to do those things. So it's such a difficult balance. And I feel very sorry for the therapist that had to deal with me through that time, because I could not have been a particularly nice patient.
No, but I think a lot of those therapists at that time, they're trying to get you to a point where you are not dying, or you are not going to die in the very foreseeable future. So it's
Exactly.
like, what can we do so that this person isn't having organs shut down, as opposed to how are we repairing this so this doesn't happen ever again? Because someone then has to be at the place to be ready to deal with the how do we get this so it doesn't happen again.
Yeah, and you're right. There are people at every stage of the journey, and those therapists are specially trained to deal with people that were in the position I was in. So, yeah, and I think that's also why, for me, I don't particularly work with people with eating disorders. Sometimes I've had a couple of clients that are sort of in their recovery, and I've worked with them alongside their practitioners. But I know for me, that's not the kind of work I'm best suited to, which is why with Beat, I tend to be a spokesperson, or I'll do talks, or I'll share my story to get the message out there. But I know for me to actually work with people like that, I mean, it's such a specialist skill set, and I take my hat off to anyone that does that. I think it's incredible work, but hard work.
Yeah, and the reason for not doing it is for you. It's like, is it because it's particularly triggering, or it's just something that it doesn't interest you in the same way as working on other areas with clients?
I think for me, I think there's two things. I think it could be very triggering, and I recognise that in myself and know myself well enough to admit that. And I think also I spent so many years working through that myself, to then do it for work and stay in that place, just I don't think would be the healthiest thing for me. It's part of my self-care to not do that for myself.
Yeah.
But yeah, certainly I look to support and help in other ways, because it's an area I'm really passionate about, and having survived it, especially as you'll know, your life expectancy, the longer you have these illnesses, reduces rapidly. And to be alive and be a survivor and be able to talk about it as easily as I can, I think is really important to do that. I just choose to do it in different ways.
Yeah, and I think that's really, really important to just know, because I find a lot of people who have had issues around food then follow a career that means they get stuck in that place where they're still constantly talking about food or working with people around food. And I mean, it's like an alcoholic who then chooses to continue to work in a bar. It's like, and I'm not saying it doesn't work for everyone, and there's lots of people who are able to get through this and then still help people. But for a lot of people, it can be a little bit problematic of keeping them in that no man's land of kind of recovered enough, as opposed to really just getting on with their lives and finding something else completely that they really enjoy.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's so true for me.
Yeah. So just kind of shifting gears a little bit, I know prior to being a coach, you was it head of experimental marketing for Sony Mobile, something like that?
Yeah, head of experiential. My mum calls it experimental, and you're not far wrong. But yeah, head of experiential marketing at Sony Mobile. Yeah, I was there for 6 years in some capacity, but worked with them for 10 years. So
okay.
Yeah,
and
big old job.
And what was that job like? Was it something that you enjoyed doing?
I absolutely loved that job. I worked with some of the most incredibly talented people, and just people that have become family to me. I've worked on incredible projects. I got to travel the world. I did so many amazing things as a result of being there that I feel really privileged and humbled to be there. But it was also hugely, hugely demanding. Really time intensive, and put a lot of pressure on me personally. Okay. And my natural sort of mindset and personality set, working in a high pressure environment when you're somebody with an eating disorder, it's like you just transpose one problem for another, and you're like, I'm going to get obsessive about work instead. This is great.
Yeah. And in terms of what you were doing there, is there much that then translates into what you're now doing in terms of running your own business?
A lot, actually. I think for me, the power of experience is such a big thing. And I truly believe that. I think I try to come at things, whether I do talks or podcasts or work with people, I always try to get them to experience things. I try and do exercises or little techniques or give people to go away with, because I think, you know, for all of us, the power of actually experiencing something is so much more powerful than being told when you can feel it for yourself. And also, you know, one of the things I'm hoping to do, I've been planning this for a little while, is take people on retreat to Machu Picchu as well. And, you know, running events for years and being a massive traveller, the idea of sort of combining all the things I love and knowing how powerful that space is, particularly not just for me, but for a lot of people, taking people on retreat is a really big objective for me.
So look, tell me, it was one of the things that I wanted to talk with you about later on, but yeah, tell me a little bit about that retreat that you've been running, because that sounds really amazing and very interesting. So maybe a little backstory about why you do it there, because I know it features in your life and has had a big impact, but then what you're hoping to do when you take people out there.
Yeah, so for me, I think traveling anyway, you show up in a different way in your life. I think you leave a lot of baggage behind, you leave a lot of how things should be, and there's something really freeing about just having a backpack, just taking what you can carry and going and just seeing what you do, you know, being without the handbags and the straighteners and the, you know, I'm a Jewish girl, I have big Jewish frizzy hair. It's like being without straighteners is actually quite debilitating sometimes, but hugely freeing. And I think also there's a real thing, and I think Anthony Robbins is the person that says, you know, if you want to change the emotion, change the motion. And one of the things I love to do is walk with my clients, because I think when you're in motion and when you're moving, different things happen, your brain works differently. And there's loads of research and science that says that as well, although I found it so profound for me when I was in Peru, because it's where I had this epiphany, you know, walking for 4 days through incredible backdrops, you know, walking through these stunning, really harsh, imposing mountains and coming to a place where you suddenly break into the Amazon and it's lush, green, abundant rainforest. It's just the most magical journey, and it feels really, there's so much history there and so much spiritual energy there. Whether you're, you know, into that side of things or not, you can't deny the sort of feelings that you get. So to take people there and actually create a life-changing transformation, because that's the thing, it's about stepping into who you should be and making that transformation and knowing that it's not just a holiday. We're not just going to come and get a suntan or some photos, or we're going to come back and be fundamentally different because we've gone on a journey, both physical, both emotional and spiritual as well, and make a change on every level and come back different and fully connected to who we are. So that's why I do it. And I think I do it because that's the transformation that I had. And I did that without any kind of coaching or support or, you know, the magic was woven into the journey for me automatically. So by the time I got to the Sun Gate, which is where you see the view of Machu Picchu, I literally just burst into floods of tears. And even though I had some really crazy, like really loud American guys behind me sort of taking pictures and posing and like going crazy behind me, kind of everything just disappeared. And it was just me in that moment of just like, oh my God, I cannot believe I'm in this magical place. And I think it's a really, really amazing space to have a transformation in. So yeah, that's why I do it.
Nice. And so how many of these retreats have you done before?
So I haven't done any of them before, actually. I'm running the first one. I was planning to run the first one this year. The Zika virus came and sort of screwed a few things up, and this year there's a few other things going on. So I'm hoping to run the first one next year. Okay,
great. And in terms of traveling, I know from reading your stuff, you said you've traveled to 50 odd countries. Maybe it's more than this. I don't know when you last updated your website. But look, I'm someone who also really loves to travel as well. Where are the places apart from that have been like your favorite places to travel to? Like maybe a couple of them, and maybe give some reasons for this, for your choices.
Oh, this could be an entire podcast on its own, Chris. I have a lot. I mean, I think the beautiful thing, and I suspect you're the same, is that when you travel, like there's a little piece of you that stays with every country. Every sort of place you visit has some sort of magical lesson or interest. Whether or not you go back or not, or whether or not you feel connected long term is a different thing. But certainly, I think the thing that nobody tells you about when you travel is that you end up leaving pieces of yourself around the world. So for me, the really special places, I've got a lot. I think Colombia stole my heart. Colombia is probably my favorite country in the world, just because it's so unexpected. I think the people are so warm, so friendly. The country is so beautiful. And I had never been anywhere actually where people stopped you on the street and got really excited to talk to you because you were a tourist and you were in their country, and they'd invite you home for dinner, and they'd get you, one of my friends ended up back at a place at a friend's house. And then she woke up her whole family, and they came down and were dancing with him until 6 a.m. and made him breakfast. And like, it was just crazy. So I think I loved Colombia. I think Barcelona is like in Europe is my favorite city. I feel so at home there, and I feel so like, I mean, I spent 10 years going there for work, so that helped, but it feels like a second home. I think Istanbul is magical because it's two worlds colliding, and it's again, another magical city. And India really, really humbled me. I think that was where, on my first backpacking trip, I came home and was truly changed and truly appreciated the magic of my own country. You know, as an 18, 19-year-old, you can't wait to leave home, and you're like, London's shit, I can't wait to leave, and I hate the buses, and this is all rubbish, and I can't believe the transport system doesn't work. And then you go to India, you're like, oh, London's all right. But India was it really taught me how contented people can be and how connected people can be without all the stuff that we accept as normal. You know, we don't need 15 different handbags and 20 different jackets and this pair of shoes. And, you know, I was watching people washing the streets and women on trains with no money and nothing sharing their food with us. And it was truly humbling. And to come back as I turned 20 in India. So to come home, you know, as a 20-year-old, having had that experience before I went out into the world, I think I, by nature, was a lot more humble and a lot more appreciative of how lucky I was and how fortunate I was just by the nature of having been born to an English couple in London, and how, you know, it was just life-changing, I think, going to India.
Okay. Of all those places you mentioned, Barcelona is the only one that I've been to, but it is one of my most favorite cities. And so, it's somewhere I've been to a number of times. And I've never done the real long form travel where I put on a backpack and just gone away for 6 months. I mean, I moved to the UK and then never left. But I've never just done constant traveling, but much prefer doing short trips where I'll be away for a couple of weeks at a time. But no, I do.
I can do that myself, Chris. It's like I'm going to Vietnam in a couple of weeks with my husband, and we're like, we've only got 2 weeks. How do people do this? We actually have to be organised and plan a route, and we need to stop reading The Lonely Planet because there's so many new places we want to go to. So
yeah. Have you ever heard like Henry Rollins talk, or know who Henry Rollins is?
I know who Henry Rollins is, but I don't. What talk are you talking about?
So he is a guy who used to be the lead singer of Black Flag, and then was in the Henry Rollins band, and he's the person who probably has traveled more than anyone else I know, and he does these things called spoken word tours where he'll just get up on stage and he'll talk for 2.5 hours, 3 hours non-stop, just telling stories about his life. But he just travels the world to all the most far-flung places. Like, he says that basically when someone on the news where the president says you shouldn't go to wherever it may be, he says, cool, book me a flight to that place. And so he's been in certain places where there's been, like, he'll try and find somewhere there's been a coup or there's political unrest, and just go there and experience it. And he did a great podcast with Joe Rogan where he chatted for like 2 or 3 hours just all about this. So for someone who's into travel, I would highly recommend checking out Henry Rollins and hearing him talk about this stuff, because
I've heard him on the Joe Rogan show.
Okay.
Yeah, I've heard him on the Joe Rogan because my husband is obsessed with that podcast, so I heard him on that. But I'll definitely check him out more because he was really interesting on that. But I think we were on the way to Dartmoor or something and was listening to it.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I've seen him do his live show 2 or 3 times where he just does spoken word, and just a phenomenal public speaker, and just someone who's had the most interesting life. I mean, I'm very much into travel. I'm also very much into music and listening to all the different people that he references and different situations he's been in. Yeah, he's a fantastic guy.
Okay, I'm going to check him out more.
So one of the big things about you and your brand is self-care. So let's have a bit of a chat about self-care. So just starting with, what does self-care mean to you? What does the term mean?
I think that's a really good question because it is different for so many people. And I think, the the article that you wrote on this recently, a lot of people assume it's just bubble baths and, the one-off special things that you do. But for me, self-care it's sort of really multifaceted. And I think it comes down to taking care of yourself across, mind, body, and I call it life or spirit or whatever you want to call it. I call it life. And I think it is about this daily acts of kindness towards yourself. It's like really treating yourself with respect, with care, with love, choosing to nourish yourself in every situation that you can. And being consistent with that. It's not just like when you've had a bad day and you come home and you're like, I've had a really bad day, I need to look after myself, I'm going to jump in the bath. It's like every single day putting those things in place that actually take care of you on your physical and emotional and spiritual being. So that's what self-care is to me.
Okay. And so how do you work on this with clients? And I know this is an incredibly broad question. And as you said, everyone is different, but maybe comment on like 2 or 3 different ways, or even just ideas where you think people might be getting self-care wrong, or where people fall down with making mistakes. So yeah, just generally talking about self-care and you doing stuff with clients.
So a lot of the stuff I do with clients, a lot of people come to me and they're like, but I'm already doing everything. Love's perfect. I'm juicing, I'm going to yoga 5 times a week, and I'm doing this and I'm doing that and I'm doing the other. And, I'm barely sleeping, but I'm getting everything done. And you can hear the stress in them already. And you're like, When are you resting? When are you taking care? And they're like, well, I have no time to take care of myself because, I'm doing all these things that I should be doing, and I'm juicing and I'm doing this. And you're like, whoa, okay. So a lot of what I do with people is teaching them to slow down and to release their sort of need for everything to be perfect. I mean, I would probably say that most people I work with to some degree or another tend to be quite perfectionist in their way. And, work has to be perfect. Life has to be perfect. My body has to be perfect. The way I eat has to be perfect. This new thing tells me that I need to be like this. And it's starting to gently work with them and unpack certain things and actually look at areas of their life that they are maybe, I guess, punishing themselves rather than nourishing themselves. That's a really big question and a really big piece that I tend to work on. We look at, okay, with that work that you're doing, are you really taking care of yourself? Are you really enjoying it? Are you sort of punishing yourself for things? Are you staying too late? Are you not putting boundaries in? Boundaries are a really big thing with my clients on self-care. They tend to put themselves last on their list all the time, and everybody else is more important. And, saying yes to everything, saying, sure, I'll be there. Yep, I'm going to go to that event. Yes, I'll be there on the day. They're all on the same day in 3 different places. That's fine. I will figure that out and I will get there. And it's like, actually, how are you being kind to yourself, or giving the things that you want to be at the time and attention and love that they deserve? Because you're so scattered and so drained of energy, you can't do all of those things. And, I've had to walk this walk myself and do it for myself. And in fact, my husband will often come and remind me if I'm playing up and be like, you teach people this stuff, saying yes to everything. You've got 15 things to do this weekend. What are you going to say no to? And I was like, oh, yeah. So, it happens to all of us. None of us are perfect. And I think a lot of it is starting with boundaries and mindset, because I think, and you'll know this from the work you do, fundamentally, how we think about ourselves and how we treat ourselves internally often shows up externally. And can't sort of paper over the cracks with an exercise regime or the right diet plan if fundamentally underneath you don't believe you deserve it and you're not willing to sort of be kind to yourself. A lot of it is just distraction. So a lot of what I do is set the mindset piece first and the foundations, and then we build from there.
Okay, cool. And look, just while you're talking about that, so just recounting a experience I had on the weekend. I was talking to a friend and she's been having some trouble with sleeping and other things going on. I was like, oh, maybe you should try meditating. And she was then recounting how many hours a day she's having to work, and she's up at 5 o'clock and she doesn't finish till whatever, and she's just back to back with all of this stuff. And just that thought of 10 minutes of meditation is not going to cut it with what you've got going on. You are going to have a re-evaluation of how you set up your work day. Because there needs to be a much bigger overhaul to make a difference. And I think that's what I talked about in the article that you referenced earlier on, and I'll put a link to that article in the show notes, is that a lot of the time people's focuses on self-care are these tiny little acts that in the whole scheme of things just aren't going to make much of a difference. Like, yes, it's better than nothing, but it's just not going to be doing what you're wanting to do. Like, self-care should be the bigger picture stuff, not the tiny little incidentals that people try and fit into their life.
That's it. And it's the reality is, if you're burning yourself out to such an extent that you know, finding 10 minutes to do something is a stress. It's like, actually, fundamentally, you need to rebalance stuff first, because it's like, you know, 10 minutes in a stressful day. What, you know, and I see this, actually, I reference this a lot with people that go to yoga. They go to yoga in their lunch break, and they're rushing to yoga, and they're on the phone, and they're throwing their clothes off, and they rush into yoga, and they lie down, and they're all like, oh, I'm doing yoga. And then they come straight back out and pick straight back up where they left off. And I'm like, that kind of defeats the object of going. I mean, it's good that you go, and yes, good. Yes, you're making an hour for yourself, but actually you need to think about it, like you say, in the context of everything else that's going on. I'm just laughing because I used to be one of those people that did that.
Oh, sure. And look, I can be sort of nice and objective and tell people what they should be doing, but I fall into the same traps as everyone else, and I work too long hours, or I don't take enough time, or whatever. So, like, I'm well aware of this stuff within my own life as well. And one of the, I mean, just with some of the comments you were making there in terms of stuff you work on with clients, self-awareness. I mean, this is something I find myself chatting about much more with clients. Is this something you spend a lot of time on with people?
Yeah, I think, you know, absolutely. I think we're so busy in our busy lives that we forget to sort of check in, and there's such wisdom in ourselves and becoming aware of who we are. You know, I'm sure you'll talk about this with your clients, you know, body wisdom and body awareness, and just sort of slowing down enough to actually understand what's going on for you. And, you know, wait a minute, why am I feeling that? Why am I reaching to the fridge and trying to, like, devour a packet of biscuits? What's really going on for me? What's going on inside? And that's why I say I always start with mindset, because self-awareness and gives you the opportunity to have a choice. And I think that's critical. And I think people need to slow down often to realise that stuff. Like I say, you know, when you're rushing through life, you barely stop to take breath, let alone go, oh, why am I feeling like this right now? And what's going on for me? And what do I really need instead? And rather than, you know, eating 15 packets of crisps, is it what I need really is a hug and to talk to somebody and maybe spend some time with someone? So, yeah, I think self-awareness is critical.
And I think often the way, like how you've talked about it there, I definitely agree with, but often the way I'm talking about self-awareness is in terms of how someone is structuring their life. And it feels often that people are doing things because they believe they should be doing things, or this is the way that I've been told I should be doing it, as opposed to, well, what do you really want to be doing with your life? Like, how do you want to be spending time? Because there are people who are very happy to work 10, 12, 14 hours a day, and they genuinely love what they do. And yes, at some point they can get burnt out by doing that, but it's very much their passion and who they are. And for other people, they find themselves in that trap, but there is no love there. It's more that I'm doing this because, as you said before, you're the perfectionist and that's what you believe you should be doing, but it's not really, I don't know if supporting is the right word, it's not really just nourishing you. And so I think the self-awareness piece a lot when I'm chatting about it with people is like, what do you want to be doing with your life? Because everyone has different ways of things that support them, different ways of how they genuinely enjoy spending their time. And I don't think there's often enough reflection where people take a step back and be like, how do I really want to be doing this?
Oh, it's so true. I have a magic wand question, which I use with pretty much every client, which is like, you know, if I could wave a magic wand and your life would be exactly as you wanted it, what would you be doing? Like, what would be different? And I think you're right. You know, so many of us, and certainly I would put myself in this category to some degree. You know, we go through life saying, I should be doing this, or I should get a job, or I should be here, or, you know, I should get the house, and should such a flag, because often we get caught and trapped in something, and then we forget that actually we have a choice, and you're just like, well, I've built this up now and I need to keep doing it. You almost don't, like you say, step back and reflect and question if it's even what you want anymore. Yeah. And I think that's why for so many of the people that I coach, I mean, I coach a lot of women sort of in their mid-30s, early 30s to mid-30s, typically my clients. And a lot of them are getting to that point where they're waking up and they're sort of saying to themselves, oh my God, is this it? Is this what there is to life? This isn't what I'm expecting, but I don't know how to get off the hamster wheel. I don't know how to get off this merry-go-round. What do I do? And often that's, one of the first things that they'll say to me when I work with them when we're doing our consultation is like, I just feel like there should be more, and I'm doing all the things right that I think I should be doing, but just life looks great, but it just feels like crap and I don't know what to do about it.
Yeah. And this kind of then leads on to an article that you wrote that I wanted to chat with you about, where you wrote all about fear. And in the article, you stated, often the very thing we're afraid of suffering is what we're suffering already. And I think this is a really important concept and often keeps people stuck. But do you want to just explain what you talked about as part of that article?
Oh, wow. Yeah. The thing that I'm often fascinated about is when I work with my clients, we'll talk about the situation that they don't want to be in. And the client that I referenced in the article actually inspired the article is, she's like, I'm stuck in a job I hate. I don't want to be stuck in a job I hate, doing things that I don't love, not spending time with my family, feeling unfulfilled, feeling frustrated and like my life could mean more. And I was like, oh, okay, so what's going on for you right now? And she's like, well, I'm stuck in a job I don't love and I feel unfulfilled and I want to be doing something more and I'm not spending time with my kids. And I'm like, oh, okay. And she's like, oh, my God. And I was like, yeah, so you're exactly where you're afraid of being. So how about we change that? And I think for most of us, we're so scared of the unknown, but we all get comfortable with what we know. It's like better the devil you know. And you're like, well, if I change something, what could happen? And often when you really explore the thing you're really afraid of, you realize you're exactly where you are. So in theory, you have nothing to lose. It's like, well, you might as well try something, because if you're afraid of being here, this is where you are already. And you're still here, you're surviving, you're coping, and doesn't feel very good. But this is where you are. So let's change that. Let's work towards it. And I think it's really interesting. And often I do this work and I'll be like, what's the worst that can happen? What am I really afraid of? And you're like, what I'm afraid of is either right here and I'm experiencing it already, or it's like some crazy wild, everything's going to be awful, I'm going to lose my job and this is going to fall down and my house is going to go and my husband's going to leave me. And you're like, well, okay, that's probably not going to happen.
Yeah.
And you can work backwards. So yeah, I'm just constantly fascinated when you work with people and you find the same stuff coming up. So the article was really inspired by that particular client, but it's relevant to pretty much every client I know. Yeah.
And what I also find when starting to then chat about that stuff is there's almost if I stay where I am, like, yes, it's bad, but at least I know, like, at least I have certain excuses, or I have this bad job, I have my partner. But there's the fear of, if I change everything and then I still fail, like, what excuse do I have then? And so it's like, I'll just settle and I'll just stay stuck.
So true. And it's almost easier to blame other things.
Yeah.
And be like, it's my job. It's the fact that, I don't have enough time. And actually, it's so much harder to go, actually, I'm creating this. This is my fault and I can change it. That it's amazing how liberating it is when you realize you truly have choice over every single thing in your life. You have a choice about how you respond to stuff and what you do with stuff. And sometimes the choices might not be nice. Might not be great choices, but you always have a choice. And I think that can be quite, the responsibility of that can be quite crippling for a lot of people.
Yeah.
But it's also quite freeing.
Yeah, when you said it can be quite liberating for people, the thing in my head was like, I'm not sure if liberating is the word that most people will think about when they hear that, or that some people will think about when they hear that, because that is then crippling in terms of, well, then what do I do? Yeah.
Suddenly, if you're responsible, it's overwhelming for a lot of people. Me too. When I realized that I truly had the choice about my eating disorder, that it wasn't happening to me, I was creating it. Like, it takes a while to learn how to deal with that kind of responsibility. And when you can, and you realize, actually, I can choose how to do this. I can choose to continue. I can choose to do this. It's like, and I think traveling actually helped me realize that. It's like waking up every morning and knowing that you didn't have to be anywhere and you could choose whatever you wanted to do, and you were responsible for whether or not you got on the bus or not. And it was such a tiny example for me in my life, but it's sort of that freedom and that expansiveness of, actually, I can do anything, literally anything. I could be in a different country tomorrow if I want to be. I can talk to that person or not. I can change hostels. And it started to really help me see that sort of way that I could be in my own life as well. So that really helped me. But you're right. it's liberating and crippling all at the same time, which I think you have to work through as an individual, which is why people come to work with coaches and therapists and other people to help them deal with that responsibility and take it forward in a manageable, easy, safe way for themselves.
Yeah, definitely. So, Mel, look, this is a really great conversation, but I unfortunately need to bring it to a close. But before we do, like, where can people be finding out more information about you? If you have anything that you're wanting to promote, then feel free to do so. And I'm going to put everything in the show notes.
So I guess the first place to go and check me out is on my website, which is melnoakes.com, and take the self-care quiz. It will give you a personalised assessment and some things to start thinking about to put your self-care in order if you're struggling or if you know that you need to look at this area. That's a great place to start. And then I have an online 6-week program all about learning to love the skin you're in, and it looks at things like mindset and self-care and basic nutrition and how to put up, how to sort of move forward in life. And that will be coming out, hopefully. I'm going to be launching that again in, what month are we in? I lose track of days sometimes. I'm so overexcited by stuff.
We're recording this towards the end of February.
Okay. So it'll be coming out in the spring. So sort of around April, May time, it'll be out. So if you, you can also, on the website, you can put your name and email address to be the first to hear when that's out as well. But the self-care quiz is a great place to start. And of course, I'm all on social media in lots of different places, and I'll give you the links, Chris, so you can put them under this.
Okay, perfect. Well, look, thank you so much for coming on the show. It was really lovely chatting with you today. And seeing as though you live in London, next time we definitely need to do this in real life.
Yes, that would be great.
But yeah, thank you again. Cheers, Mel.
Thanks for listening to Real Health Radio. If you are interested in more details, you can find them at the 7 Health website. That's www.7health.com.